Hello, this is One Mana Left. We're in Crucible League. I'm not going to miss say Sanctum this time. And like promised, I ended up playing the Mjolnir build this league. A lot of new players to it. I had some fun with it. But when this patch hit, there was the addition of a new skill. And it was called MANAforged Arrows. Not a skill, a support gem, actually. Usually when a new, interesting new mechanic of a support gem gets added, you see people really jump on it and do crazy stuff with it. Part of it depends on the power level of the support. When Archmage was added, you saw Archmage builds take over the entire world, and that lasted for like 5 leagues. This league, MANAforged Arrows was added, and it's similar to Archmage for bow skills. Now, it kind of, once again, came down to how powerful it was going to be. But this one didn't really take off. There's basically nobody playing this at a very, high number level. There's a version of the build that's being played that is focusing on triggers. And to me, it feels criminal because it's a good-looking clear speed build. You just trigger a bunch of skills and run around and just blow up the screen. That's good. People like that. But you're playing a build with a mana stacking theme to it, and you're running around with 500 mana. Now, as someone who has a PhD in mana builds, this bothers me. It bothers me even more because MANAforged Arrows is not Archmage. It's not any mana stacking skill we've seen before. A lot of the mana stacking skills get good damage because they double dip. If you double your damage, you quadruple. Or if you double your mana, you quadruple your damage. If you 10 times your mana, you 100 times your damage. Well, that's pretty good. MANAforged Arrows does not work that way. There is a third multiplier. You get multiply of increased damage the more mana you have. You get multiply of flat damage the more mana you have. And lastly, you get a more damage multiplier the more mana you have. So with MANAforged Arrows, if you do it this way, the way I'm about to show you, if you double your mana, you 8 times your damage. If you 10 times your mana, you 1,000 times your damage. So we're going to see a build here that does some really big numbers. Because unlike the skills, unlike the versions of MANAforged Arrows you've maybe seen so far, we're not rocking 500 mana. We got a bit of a healthier number of mana and ES here. The way I like to build builds is I like to check all 3 boxes. You know, people always say speed, tankiness, damage, pick 2. I like to do all 3. I like to make a build that's fast, does a shit ton of damage, and is tanky. Well, we're going to show off some damage here because we have a maximum HP Lich. This isn't the hardest modded boss, and it's not super deep. I haven't been delving a lot this season because I plan to play Diablo 4 this week. But the thing about monsters in Path of Exile is they actually max out on HP at 2.147 billion. That's the max 32-bit number for assigned integer. And delve bosses below 1,000 all reach this cap. So whether it's a depth 6k all or this Lich at 1267, they both have 2.147 billion health. The reason I want to do this demo on a Lich, though, is because Ahwaddle and all, the most you can ever burn them for is 50% of their health in one burn. Kurgal, however, has 2 50% burns. Then he resurrects with a full new bar of 2.147 billion HP. Then you can burn him full 100 to 0. So we're going to try to do that and show you a little bit of damage and tankiness. Now, you'll notice I am pretty fast. That's not necessarily because the build is like some ingenious speed thing. This is just generic mage blood. Yes, I have some extra flask effect that's giving me more speed. That's part of the crucible mods on my bow. I also have double silver and quicksilver. But here, let's just stack a little extra here. We don't need defense where we're going. But let's see what I can do to this guy. There's about 3 seconds of ramp before you really shoot up. And then you'll see you really shoot up. So that's half of a max HP monster. He has to finish his... He's phased, but he has to finish his attack. That's 1.1 billion burst right there. And like you saw, there's like 3 seconds of ramp. And then you hit your actual peak of like 500 million. This isn't really an issue for like mapping or easy content because you just have like 5 or 10 million lightning arrow DPS and you just blow up the whole world. But on really, really tanky stuff like a max HP delve boss, well, if you ramp for 2 or 3 seconds, your damage can ramp to like 1 billion and you can just kill it. Oh, hang on. I gotta wait for Cloak. Alright, there's Cloak. There he goes. Oh, he's gotta finish this beam attack again. Alright. See how fast I can burn this. No, not quite one shot. Not quite one phase. I wanted to do the one phase there, but I'll show you a clip of what a one phase looks like. And then I'll talk about what the difference is there. So I was trying to do like the peak 500 or 600 mil DPS there, but you're a little at the mercy of your timing. So I probably only peaked like 400 or 500 mil there and didn't get the one phase off. I'll show you what one looks like though. This is a clip from pretty much the one other guy who's been testing the build with me and playing the build. And he's doing Inquisitor, which we'll talk about more later. Both Hierophant and Inquisitor are viable for this. Notably, Inquisitor is better at single target and bossing. So he's running, as you can see, Assassin's Mark. So that already is going to give him a lot more single target. He's got a little bit more stacked radius, so his is more compact, which is better for bossing. And he pulls off like a good executed burst here. But I'm going to add a note that he also has crafted a new bow since this and tweaked a little bit of the setup. So he probably has 40 or 50% more damage than what you're seeing here. But this is a 2 bill HP Kurgal burst with the Inquisitor setup. With probably similar gear level to me. But there you go. It's about 5.5 seconds for... So like 385 mil DPS when you factor in the ramp. But there's like 3 seconds of ramp for like the full 2 billion burst. So, you know, he probably peaked at like 600 mil there. Now, you might be thinking, well, I don't want to play a build that has 3 seconds of ramp. Well, here's the thing. It only matters there because you're fighting something that has 2 billion health. Let's just turn the HP down a little bit, all right? Let's go to something with a little more mortal amount of HP. Let's look at an UberX Arc. Let me make sure I actually have the node or the points selected. Oh god, I gotta look at this production quality, having to respec tree to get the UberX Arc turned on. What kind of YouTuber is this? This can't even click the nodes correctly. So notably, UberX Arc has about 250 million HP, so 1/8 of that. However, he is a boss that takes like 90% reduced damage the second he becomes attackable, and that ramps... They added this to Shaper back in the day, and that ramps down all the way to 0 after like 10 seconds. So after a few seconds, he's taking like half reduced. So this should have like 1/4 the health of that Kurgal. Let's see what this looks like. So hang on, just to do things correctly, I will put a ruby flask on. I know I should just walk in and brute force this, but I will do my due diligence and put a ruby flask on. So this is an UberX Arc that I alped here. Alright, let's test this out. And here we go. There he goes. So, if you saw the Kurgal burst and you're like, I don't like playing a build that has 3 seconds of ramp. Once again, that is a monster that has 8 times the HP of an Uber Pinnacle boss. That is not your normal gameplay, okay? That is a modded Uber Pinnacle boss. Looking acceptable? I would hope so. Alright, but we'll call the Deep Delve boss high health. We'll call the Uber Pinnacle boss medium health. Let's see what low health looks like, because ultimately, people play this game, it's an ARPG, they want to slay monster mans, they want to blow the screen up, they want to make things pop. So let's just see what it looks like in like a tier 16 map, okay? So, I'm going to switch to Lightning Arrow. That's actually one of the nice things about this setup, is the skills don't really matter that much. You could use any skill. You could use Burning Arrow, you can use Tornado Shot, Lightning Arrow, like pretty much any bow skill works. You can just change them based off their mechanics. So, I like the mechanics of how Lightning Arrow works for mapping, so I just switched to Lightning Arrow for mapping. I have no commitment to any one skill. It's all generic damage scaling, which we'll show later. But let's just show a tier 16 map. Actually, no. I was going to get more Sulfite. Fuck, whatever. It doesn't matter. Let's just show a tier 16 map. Like I said, for the... Oh, let's put a Quicksilver on, too. For the really high HP stuff, you might be like, oh, yeah, I don't want to ramp. But, like, on tier 16 stuff, like, there is no ramp. You might catch yourself with, like, 1 second of cloak downtime. But, like, even with no cloak up, you're still going to blow things up. Like... But, okay, just to reiterate, though, what you're seeing here, there are builds that clear faster than this. This is not a 10 out of 10 clear speed build, but it's probably like a 9 for clear speed. There are builds that are faster than this, but this is pretty dang fast. But remember, this has nothing to do, what you're seeing, with the MANAforged part. Kind of, the scaling does. But for the most part, this is just because I'm wearing a Mage Blood, and I'm using a bow. There's no build in this game that uses a bow and a Mage Blood that can't map fast. It's not possible. You've failed Path of Exile if you're a bow character with a Mage Blood and you can't map fast. But the reason I share this, though, is like, I don't want to play some tanky skill that's clunky to map with. I want to just be able to kill stuff instantly in maps. Like, I want to blow up 2 screens when I shoot the bow. I want to run at 318 move speed. That's what's fun. Like, look at beach. We just did a strand. Like, to me, going all in on like some deep delve build that's really clunky but does a lot of damage and has a lot of tankiness just doesn't feel fun to play, because ultimately, like, what you enjoy in this game is typically mapping and clearing, and all the other stuff is like extra content. But like, you want the base game to feel smooth. You want your clear speed to be smooth. So I think it's really important to have good clear speed normally. Oh, this is a Temp Chains map. I'm like, I feel a little bit slower than normal. I'm like, yeah, it's Temp Chains. So I have no curse reduction whatsoever. I'm not using a curse immune flask, and this is a Temp Chains map. So this is like, if I was wanting to do a demo of the speed, this is the absolute worst map I could have picked. Just Temp Chains, no curse reduction up. No curse flask. But I mean, like, yeah. You get the point, though. Like, you can sigil for hard bosses like Ubers, but the HP of monsters in tier 16 maps is just too low to matter. This is kind of the common theme in a lot of the builds I play. Tier 16, there's no delve scaling, there's no crazy health monsters, so nothing you do matters. Everything just dies. But yeah. Let's talk about the build itself, though. So, how are we doing damage? Well, I have this bow on, and it's a little weird looking. I've got a Crucible tree here for attributes, strength, int, attack speed, frenzy on kill, but then 15 flask effect, which is part of the speed you're seeing. We're scaling some flask effect to get even more Mage Blood effect. We'll talk a little bit more about the fact that you're seeing a very high level version of it versus what maybe a lower end build would look like. But how are we doing damage? Okay, well, the new gem here is MANAforged arrows, which once again, it triggers a linked skill after you've spent X amount of mana, and then it gets a more damage multiplier 1% per mana cost. So some of the MANAforged builds you're seeing right now aren't scaling mana at all. So they're kind of ignoring the more multiplier and just using this as a free trigger. And that's fine. I mean, having like a free trigger on a bunch of links is kind of cool. But like, it's just not, that guy's not going to get this 2 Divine Sale right now. Sorry, dude. It doesn't give you the crazy numbers. So how do you get the crazy numbers? Well, you get your mana cost up. How do you do that? Well, if you're familiar with how mana builds work in 2023, you're going to see that I happen to be an old man who forgot his grocery list, so he put a Post-it note and stamped it to his forehead. This is how you play mana builds for like the last 3 years. Some people don't like it, but that's the way it is. Welcome, meet Indigon. So there's a couple things different about the Indigon, but we'll get to that later too. Indigon with Arcane Cloak is the bread and butter, the meat of modern mana builds. So this is, if you're familiar with the Mjolnir Hierophant setup, this is not too different to start with, but it branches a different way. So this is going to give you a lot of Indigon stacks, which is going to get your spend way up. So this is when Lightning, it goes from being like no cost whatsoever, and my tooltip is 70k, to my tooltip is 700k, but that number's not correct either. That's also the lightning arrow damage, not the storm rain damage. Okay. So Indigon makes things really expensive, and it actually ramps up and ramps up and ramps up. Different dude wants this. And it ramps up to the point where you are spending a ridiculous amount of mana. So here's where it diverges from how Mjolnir plays. Mjolnir has to rely on your actual mana leech of 20% per second, plus natural recovery of about 10% per second. So you have a fairly finite budget of about 30% mana per second. And you can't really get more than that. You work within that range, and you tailor your whole mana loop around that. That's why you go for like 50% Indigons, whereas you see me, I'm using a 60% Indigon, because I want that number to just go to the moon. Because we're not limited by the normal mana leech cap, because this was added this league, this new mastery. 10% of leech is instant. There's a lot of like wiki explanation reading you can do on how leech works, and it's one of those things where if you're a little new to the game, you have to have like a PhD to understand all the like stupid leech mechanics. But I'm going to give you the most dummy explanation of what this says, okay? You recover 1% mana and energy shield every time you hit anything with anything, okay? So if I'm doing a colossal number of hits per second, I am getting back my entire mana like every fraction of a second. I'm getting several 100% mana per second. And because of how the damage scaling works, that makes things go very, very high. It also makes my energy shield leech very, very high. I will recover my entire ES pool like every 10th of a second when I'm in Delve. That makes it really tanky. I'll show you a node in a little bit here, just to show like all the the leech power. So we have instant ES leech and instant mana leech. That makes us have pretty much infinite of both of those things. Well, how good is that for damage? Well, let me go to my POB config here, and let's just say I've spent 10,000 mana. That's pretty good. That's a lot of mana. Well, what's the damage looking like here? Combined DPS, that's 2.8 million. Well, remember how I said how this scales? This is also underselling it because it's not changing my mana max amount. But let's say I'm spending my whole mana pool twice per second, which is the case when I'm ramping all the way to the top. Let's say I spent my entire mana pool twice per second for 4 seconds. Oh, would you look at that? 282 million DPS. And this is assuming one arrow. If you assume a couple number of arrows because Storm Rain fires a lot of projectiles, you can see the damage can go up into like, this is 670 million if you're not counting the decimal places. We can get this over 1 billion because of just filthy, degenerate Indigon abuse. But then you're thinking, wait a second. I thought I knew how Indigon worked. 24% increased spell damage for each 200 total mana you have spent recently, up to 2,000%. So isn't that making us just gain 2,000% spell damage? I don't understand. The Indigon is actually not giving us the damage. Meet Anomalous Mana Leech. Now, Indigon has a cap of 2,000%. This is an alt quality gem that says supported skills have 10% each increased damage for each 200 mana you've spent recently. This does not have a cap, and this works for attacks. This is what's scaling our damage. Because 130,000 mana spent recently is 6,500% damage, not the mere 2,000 that Indigon gives. But wait, there's more. If you look at this bowcraft for the 8% quality, we can actually push this number even higher, and you can say the one in the Storm Rain is actually giving us 15% increased damage per 200 mana spent recently. So in this case, if I were to have spent 130,000 mana recently, this one alt quality gem mod is giving me 10,000% increased damage, where I otherwise with no spend only have like 300%. So this one alt quality is funding the whole build's increased damage up to like 10,000%. That's one of our scaling directions. The more multiplier on MANAforged is the second scaling direction. And then the third scaling direction is flat damage from Arcane Cloak, because we're not actually getting that much on the bow itself. And then Poised Prism, which is giving us a little bit of flat damage per attribute, and we're attribute stacking. We have like 3k combined strength and int. So this is giving us a decent amount of flat damage, and I have a corrupt one for +1 arrow. So let me just back up here and show you a delve fight. Let's do a tier 3 Azerite node, and let me do Storm Rain. You can use Storm Rain or Lightning Arrow for delve, or Blast Rain, excuse me. Like I said, any different bow skill works. They just all have different mechanics that have different strengths and weaknesses. And Lightning Arrow, I find, is the best bow skill for mapping. I think it's for sure Blast Rain for bossing on single target. And then finally, I think in Delve, it's probably about a tie. But okay, remember when I was talking about how I have like infinite ES and mana recovery when I'm hitting stuff because of the instant leech? Take a look at my ES and mana and how fast they're moving up and down, okay? You'll see my mana dip down sometimes and be back in like one game tick. But if everything's dead, that's not the case. But if things are alive on the screen, I'm all the way up and I'm having like infinite leech for ES and mana. So this is just crazy, crazy recovery for living for ES. And you might think that 130,000 mana spent number is bullshit. That is what I'm spending currently. If you look really closely at my mana globe when I'm fully ramped, when there's actually stuff to attack, I am going from 100% to 0 like multiple times per second, as long as there's stuff to hit. So I think the 130k number is actually generous, because that's only assuming 2 mana globes per second. There's actually a lot of times when there's enough stuff to leech on where it's probably more like 3 or 4 globes per second. I didn't have cloak up for this guy, but now I do. There, he's dead. So yeah, that's a showcase at a 1266 tier 3 Azerite node of like, and to be fair, even at that, we're not deep enough for stuff to really live yet. So stuff was just dying if I ramped too high. Like, I'd ramp up and then everything would die and then my leech would go away. And then new stuff would spawn and I'd start to ramp and then everything would die and my leech would go away. If I was at like 7k depth like Rudy right now, I would just ramp and ramp and ramp until I'm doing actually this much DPS. And then since there's a 2 billion HP cap in this game, eventually still everything would die after like 3 seconds of ramp. So even at that depth, I'm still too shallow to show off even like 20 or 30% of the ramp DPS for more than like 1 second. Because if I get that high, everything dies and then the loop breaks. But so it's either you're killing everything or something comes along that has more HP and you just ramp up until you kill that. So you have the lightning arrow damage that just covers all your like tier 16 mapping clear speed. And then you have the potential to kill a monster with any amount of HP, because the second anything lives for like a couple seconds, you'll just ramp to 500 million DPS. So let's look a little bit more at some of the mechanics. So I have lightning arrow or blast rain in my chest. This is the trigger skill. This is my big spend. I want this cost to be high, and I want my attack speed to be kind of lined up with the cooldown. So MANAforged arrows has a cooldown of 0.5 seconds. Now, the way I'm treating this right now is that I want my attack speed to do the second hit after the cooldown. So if I had 4.1 attacks per second and I was hitting every 0.24 seconds, that means I would hit after 0.24, 0.48, and the cooldown would still be up at a half second. Then I would hit again at 0.72. I want to be on the other side of that. I want to be at like 3.9 so that I'm attacking every 0.26 seconds, because then I attack at 0.26, then I attack at 0.52 when the cooldown is up. So I want to have my attack speed. I can't go way low where my attack time is just after the cooldown, because then the loop won't spend fast enough. So I need to go double up, and I need to go to double the attack speed and have it so that there's one in-between hit and then one hit that can trigger the Storm Rain. I know we're getting into a little complicated, but there's no way around this for any Mana Indigon build. There's going to be this level of bullshit. Okay, the next thing I'm using is obviously Anomalous Mana Leech. And I'm using Mirage Archer. So we want hits, because hits give us Leech. And Leech gives us mana, and mana gives us like squared or cubed damage depending on the scenario. So the Mirage Archer is a decent damage link, but then it also just gives so many more hits and projectiles that it just makes the Leech that much more crazy. And it's also nice quality of life for mapping, because once again, we have quality crafted on the bow. So with Divergent, it lasts 5.2 seconds. And that's pretty nice for running around mapping. Even after you trigger it, if you're just running still, you have 5.2 seconds of this Mirage Archer that's shooting these juiced up Storm Rains and killing stuff. You have crit damage for the Hierophant, or any Templar that's using the like strength int to crit is going to want crit damage. But then finally, I'm using Divergent MANAforged arrows, because remember, I have 8 quality on the bow. So that means I can actually get this to 30 quality. So instead of triggering every 300%, it's triggering every 225%. That's like 33% more triggers. What you're looking at here is very expensive. So I'm going to briefly talk about what like a cheap version of this would look like. So one, I'm going to just say right now, I don't think this is a true league starter. I've told people that they can play Mana Bond for 2 Divines, and that's absolutely true. You can kill you can kill tier 16 maps, Guardians, even regular bosses like non-Ubers for like 2 Divines. You'll feel pretty good. You'll have pretty big numbers. You just need the core unique package. This needs a few more things to get going. So I would not call this a league starter, but I don't think you need full-blown Mage Blood. I think the budget version of this is actually, you use the new bow. I forget what it's called, but it says, the bow itself has no stats, but it gives you 250% increased effective quiver stats. So if you can use that bow that has an okay crucible tree, that has like, you know, maybe attributes or strength int on that bow, and it's got like a 230 plus roll. Well, what you do is you triple or 3.5 times your quiver stats, which would give you like 80 all res, +3 arrows, which already covers the fractured mod that this bow has, on top of the +1 on this. You could technically get that bow corrupted, not probably that expensive, with another +1 arrow corrupt. And then the added damage also gets taken times 3.5. So with my strength and int, and you'd actually have more strength and int with an attributes belt instead of a mage blood. Rare belt would give you more strength and int than this. You're getting like 1.5 added damage per strength, per 10 strength and int. So with, call it 1,500 of each, you're getting 225 of each, so 450 flat. That bow would make that 450 flat into like 1,500 flat. So I think that bow that like 3.5 times is your quiver stats with a +1 poised prism is the budget version of this. And then you use an attributes belt. And then you're just generic mana stacking gear of like strength, int, mana. Every suffix you can find, strength, int, res. Every prefix you can find, mana. And then secondary ES and life because you're still doing the ivory tower stuff. The build overall scales stats very similarly to the mana bond build. So if you're familiar with that build at all, it's very similar stat scaling and stat building. In fact, one of the nicest things is you can basically take a mana bond hierophant, slap on a bow and quiver, and you're done. That's basically what I did here. There's a few more tweaks than that, but all right. As far as other gem links, you're still using an Eternal Blessing because you have unreserved mana. I'm putting Grace in because Wrath doesn't really work for this build. It doesn't do that much. And then instead of running a Jade Flask, since I have Grace, I'm running a Silver Flask, which now, as of this league, scales with Flask Effect. So you can get a lot of attack speed on the suffix, or I have mine on a different flask, and then the base onslaught effect gets also multiplied by Flask Effect. So this flask right now is giving me 78% attack speed and 42% move speed. Kind of crazy. But even without Mage Blood, I think Silver Flask and Eternal Blessing Grace is still the play. You're just going to want to really try to get as much attack speed as possible to make up for the loss to get your spend up. I have a second MANAforged arrow link that's like the support link. So it's MANAforged arrows, Calling Strike for support once again, Blast Rain for just number of hits. If you look and you see me shoot, it's this like rain coming down. It's a lot of hits. And then the Anomalous Mana Leech. This is giving me a lot of my leech. So on single target bosses, that like rain you're seeing coming down is a lot of hits, and each one of those with the instant leech is giving me 1% mana back. So when I'm firing off a ton of those, this one 4-link is giving me more spend for faster ramp and like 50% mana leech per second per target. So maybe like 30% per target. So on AoE, it's like infinite mana, but even on single target, it's like an extra 30% per second and faster spend. And then I get Calling Strike, and it's a little bit of damage. And then I'm doing Auras and Helm, similar to how I usually do Mana Bond. And you can still shield swap with this build. Any build that uses only damage links on weapon has the ability to shield swap. So with this, you can do two things on your shield swap. The first is you can do a really tanky shield and just do what I usually do, where you have like, you know, a swap shield for like tanking a memory game or alls or something. Or you can do the Red Blade banner with Battle Mage's Cry. It gives you a good head start because it gives you 3,000% increased damage from Indigon. Which, like I said, if you're fully ramped and you have 10,000%, that's still 30% more damage. But when you're starting off and not fully ramped, it's a really good head start. Because you might start off with only like 1,000 or 2,000% before you ramp. So starting off with a head start of 3,000% is a pretty good damage swap setup. So you either go Red Blade with Battle Mage's Cry to like pre-cast for a 12-second Battle Mage's Cry buff with like increased duration. And then you can just blow up a boss. You saw me do that on that X Arc, actually. Or you can use this swap for, like, Shaper, All, Maven memory game tanking, whatever. I did a Maven earlier, you know, face tanked everything, blew her up. Maybe I'll play that after this while I'm like, you know, talking about some last minute things. I'll show you a few other clips just to go out on. This is a max HP all. Looks kind of grainy quality. This is a max HP all 2.147 billion life. And this is the last phase 50% to 0 burn. Here he comes. And we're off. Pretty good damage, right? Like 3 seconds. I actually timed it. It was 4. Past me was exaggerating. Don't listen to him. But yeah, so that's like 300 mil on an all. I think this build is in a spot where there's a lot to theorycraft on it still. Like, the Manabon build is very theorycrafted. I've explored, in my opinion, basically every possible avenue. And there's very little out there that I think hasn't been tested or I don't know about. This build is already at, like, Manabon power, potentially. There's pros and cons. This build does more damage, by far. This build does a lot more damage than Manabond. And Manabond does more damage than 99% of builds in the game. So that's already a good start. It's got crazy recovery and, like, equal tankiness. The only advantage I would give to Manabon, which, to be fair, this is a big advantage, is you can do full damage while moving, where this build has to stop to shoot. That is a big quality of life thing for me, who's used to playing like Cyclone Trigger builds, because, you know, I'm fast, I can run fast, right? Like, that's nice. But I don't like to have to shoot, run, shoot, run, shoot, run. You know, if you're a bow player, you're used to this. But I like just playing Cyclone and moving at full speed the entire time while things are dying. That's the biggest advantage for Manabond. But there's a lot of advantages on the side of the court for MANAforged arrows. And I think there's even more to theorycraft on this. Every day we play this build, we add like 20% more damage or like 5% more tankiness. Every day. Even today we added more damage. A week from now, this could be like double the damage because there was things I didn't test out. So I think there is room to add power. But it's just bizarre to me that this skill has so much potential to be like one of the absolute most powerful builds in the game right now. And no one's really playing it. The only 2 people playing it are me and Kata, who's a guy who's been kind of building it alongside me in stream. When I made this bow, I split it, and I gave him the split one, and he's ran with it ever since. But if you just look at MANAforged arrows, like, let's just be biased here and sort by delve depth. Oh, this guy's rerolled. Okay, we had one reroll. Oh, apparently I don't have my bow equipped. I logged out without my links in. But, let me look if this has links in still. Yeah. The only 2 people is Kata and me. Like, there's a couple people at, like, the kiddie pool depth that I'm sure are just playing, like, the Palestron version or whatever that is just, like, pure trigger. But, like, there's only 2 people playing the Mana Stack version, and it's me and the guy I split my bow with. But I think this is a very underutilized method for scaling this build, and I think there's some absolute monsters that can be built by scaling this way. This is put together really scuffed in a couple days. I think someone could take this farther than me and make this like 10 times what I've shown in this video with like another week or month of tweaking. But anyways, that's it. That was another one of my long-winded rambles on this kooky thing I did in the game. I'd be curious to see people push this farther. I'm personally going to be playing Diablo 4 in a couple days, but I wanted to test this before like my end of the season after seeing this in the patch notes and being like, surely this will be powerful. And then just, it bothered me seeing no one scale it this way. So I had to do it. Hopefully you guys enjoy the build or try it out. I'll see you later.